Good afternoon, good morning, our colleagues from Colombia and Honduras. Thank you for sparing time to come to today's conversation. We are going to talk about the gender-sensitive climate policies. And in this webinar, we want to share the gender differentiated impact of climate change in the coffee sector, as you know, and how it has particularly affected the women. Does it empower or disempower women? So we are going to look at we are going to compare these in Ethiopia, Colombia, and the Honduras. We are going to see how farmers have been supported, the interventions that are in place to support our women so that they are empowered, and the challenges they are in. We are also going to see how the collaboration between us as the Desira team is going to, the collaboration and the knowledge co-production that we are having is going to help us to strengthen coffee farming and the women, the women in the coffee sector. So I will not go into details of this, because if I did, I will be diluting what the presenters who have been preparing for a whole month are going to present to us, where the focus is just the gender differentiated impact of climate change and the policies as interventions that are in place, how all these are impacting on the women, empowering or disempowering them, and where we have these challenges, what are we doing about it, or what our governments and the development partners doing about it. So over to you, our presenter from Ethiopia. Zenebe.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Let me share my slide and start. Okay, thank you everybody. I am grateful to this community of practice to invite me to present this particular session. And I am Zennaba from Ethiopian Forestry Development. And I will start to present my presentation. The outline of my presentation, I would like to start with the introduction, and then I will try to show coffee farming and the climate change in Ethiopia in short. And thirdly, the coffee marketing and the quality control regulations, what it says in the favoring women's farmers or disfavoring. And fourth, Ethiopian coffee strategy, I will present on that. And on the fifth, gender issues in Ethiopian National Adaptation Plan, what it says. And finally, I will try to show some recommendation, what should be done for starting from that. Is that audible? Hello?
Right, yes.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, as introduction, I start to as Article 35 of the Constitution of Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia clearly articulates that women shall have equal rights with men in the enjoyment of the rights and protection guaranteed to all Ethiopians. This is the basic policy issue which is underlined in the Constitution of Ethiopia. So based on affirming this commitment, the government of Ethiopia, all executive organs are required to ensure integration of gender issues in the policies, strategies, programs, projects, and action. This is what the Ethiopian government are taking from starting women's rights and equality should be integrated mainstream in each program of action, starting the clarification on the constitution of the country. So gender equality and gender integration is considered in all the relevant environmental and climate change policies, strategies, and laws, such as including the Ethiopian environmental policy, the CRG strategy, the national determined contribution, and the national adaptation plan of Ethiopia. So gender are highly integrated in this all strategies. So the government in its GTP2 set out participation and equitable benefit. Sharing of women is as one of the 9 pillars of the midterm plan. So the women's integration inclusiveness is highly integrated in all Ethiopia's policies and strategies. So as the gender action plans was established as COP 2023 and the parties were invited to participate and encourage implementing the gender action plan with a view of advancing towards the goal of mainstreaming the gender perspective into all elements of climate action. This also a gender action plan which is approved by global perspective, which is mentioned in the COP 23. So based on this gender action plan, the government of Ethiopia is affirming this consensus. So Ethiopia has taken steps to translate activities under the action plan to the national context by dealing capacity building, knowledge sharing, and communication of particularly gender issues. Women are particularly given do focus, and it also deals on the gender balance. So participation and the women's leadership has gotten a full agenda, the gender balance, so gender equities and the coherence, consistency and inclusiveness of women should be dealt in proper agenda issues. Gender responsive implementation and the means of implementation has also given a due attention in this gender plan, and monitoring and reporting on each issue of how women are benefited from this gender action plan has been highlighted, referring to this gender action plan into the country's Ethiopia's context. So fostering the empowerment of women in the coffee sector contributes to close the gender gaps, and achieving gender equality is a global priority. It is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals agenda, which is agenda Sustainable Development Goal number 5. So increasing female farmers' productivity and resilience to the impact of climate change can also make crucial contribution to meeting the future demand of coffee worldwide. Because Ethiopia is one of the exporting countries, female and women farmers are greatly involved in coffee production and development, so that participating and empowering women in this coffee sector has a great contribution to the global coffee trade as well as the national coffee marketing strategy. However, the gender gap in access to land in Ethiopia is 0.13 hectare as compared to the male-headed household, which is 0.23 hectare. This is a land productive access is limiting women farmers in the coffee sector, because this is a huge gap in the access to land is a critical problem, because land is the resource that female farmers can produce and participate to produce their coffee, so that land is a critical issue. So in this regard, land certificate should be important, giving female farmers the ownership of their land and increasing the land holding capacity, so that male and female farmers should become equitable and balanced in the access to land. So as we see in this diagram, coffee production labor in Ethiopia, females and women are taking 75% of the coffee production labor, While when you come into the income share, women's only benefit 34% of the income. So this is also an imbalance in the coffee production sector in Ethiopia, so that women are involved from the lower part up to the higher part of the value chain of coffee production. They are contributing a higher labor share, but in the income part, they benefit lesser share of than of their counterparts, the female, as male farmers, coffee farmers. So this gap should be closer to by enhancing women, by empowering women to have access to to increase their income generation, and they should become benefited as equal to male farmers. So coffee farming and the climate change in Ethiopia, as you know, coffee climate change is a global threat. So in the Ethiopian context, coffee production also affected highly by climate change impact. To this end, women farmers are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change because there are several burdens on them. They do not have equal access as women, as husbands, so that climate change has a great impact on the women farmers. So the coffee growing landscape of Ethiopia is varied and complex. So that coffee also varied in its cultivation from homestead in sun farming out of coffee garden. So that the landscape of Ethiopia coffee growing is complex, so that it is affected by climate change. To this concern, female farmers also impacted by the climate change. So the climate of Ethiopia has changed and will continue to change throughout the country. This will affect coffee farming in general, particularly female coffee farmers are highly vulnerable to this impact. So coffee growing in Ethiopia has been negatively influenced by climate change and deforestation. So that coffee should be ensured farmers should be empowered to be adaptable to this climate change influence. Climate change continue to impact and alter coffee growing in Ethiopia over the coming decade, so that preconditionally this should be taken care of and empowering women farmers how they can be adapt this climate change so that they continue their production and the productivity and become profitable throughout the climate change impacts. And the relocation of coffee farmers or areas will be a key component in building resilience for Ethiopian coffee. As climate is increasing, as climate change is increasing, coffee will shift its former location to a higher place. So, how female farmers can adapt this relocation of coffee farmers should be given due to consideration. Then appropriate adaptation measures should be given high consideration. How empowering female by providing incentives, by providing new varieties of coffees that can be adaptable to the new environment is a critical issue of coffee farming and climate change in Ethiopian context. Particularly females are vulnerable to that impact. So thirdly, the coffee marketing and the quality control regulation number 433, 2018. Article 60, certificate of competence to establish outgrowers schemes for coffee producers and exporters shall be issued if a person, sub-article 3 states that it should provide evidence about employment of professionals with coffee knowledge and the skill to promote modern coffee farming method for coffee growing farmers. So in this particular sub-article, an investor, when it's linked to outgrowers, coffee outgrowers, particularly female farmers, he should have to employ a professional. We can assist and help female outgrowers. So sub-article 4 also agrees to provide modern extension service to support and improve farm inputs to improve productivity and product quality for coffee growing farmers. This is also what is mentioned in this proclamation is the policy of the country focusing coffee and climate change, how to improve gender in particular. And this proclamation sub Article 5 also deals with pay better price than locally existing market price for received coffee from coffee outgrower farmers. In this particular case, female farmers should be benefited more when investor when comes to buy a coffee from farmers, he should pay a better price than locally than the local existing market. These are the policy issues which are being dealt regarding women and how farmers in the coffee, particularly women, should be benefited. So what Ethiopian coffee strategy says, the objective of this strategy is to maximize Ethiopia's coffee export revenue while increasing value chains so that smallholder farmers should be benefited from this strategy, particularly women. So this strategy also deals with creating employment for at least 2.7 million people across the coffee value chain. So especially women and the youth should be benefited from this strategy. It sets a strategy how women and the youth could be benefited in the coffee production. So the export earning, when you see from export earning, from conservative price scenario, in 2020, about 0.78 billions US dollar is expected, but with high price scenarios in 2029, the export earning should be 2.19 billions, and in 2035 up to 4.65 billion, according to this strategy objectives. So farmers also in the conservative price scenario in 2020, farmers of income should be 0.47 billion, while in the high price scenario, it sets in 2029 in the middle line, it becomes 1.53 billion, and in 2030, in the end line, the farmers' income should raise to 3.50 billion. So this strategy tries to increase the export earnings as well as farmers' income increment from time to time in the future. This is a prediction. So that in this context, export earning and farmer income prediction will increase according to this country strategy. So the key pillars of the strategy are almost about six. One, it deals about research. The core issues the researching is leveraging Ethiopia coffee genetic wealth would be developed to create the next generation climate resilience and disease resistant high producing yield quality varieties should be developed through research. The other also stronger research extension package should be linked because the research outcome should be provided to the generate technology to provide important services to actors along the value chain, particularly to the farmers. New varieties from research should be communicated through extension service. And the production and extension case in the pillar 2, improving productivity and agronomy could play major dividend for the Ethiopian coffee sector. And the coffee-focused training and extension could address the low adoption of good agricultural practice, and the old coffee should be trimmed, and the weekly linkage between extension and the institution and the environmental degradation should be improved. And on the third pillar, it is a processing, how coffee should be processed and reached to the market, quality management in the practice to improve and encourage exporters and international market actors so that the involvement of women in this particular case should be increased. The other is creating a national training program. We capacitate the how to in the processing sector is also one issue which is considered in this strategy. The fourth pillar is about value addition, creating value addition training programs So women's how to create and benefit from this creating value addition training program and encouraging national stakeholders and the rosters to provide advisory service could increase value added product exports so that women coffee farmers could benefit from this particular value addition training programs. High quality packaging and international marketing could also strengthen Ethiopia's standing in the global coffee market. This is a value chain pillar which would be undertaken to strengthen the coffee production and processing in Ethiopian context so that women farmers particularly given due consideration. The fifth pillar is dealing about marketing, which is marketing reform have helped to expand Ethiopia's coffee marketing channels, which is more needed to be done, ensure stronger reinforcement and a clearer communication of regulations. It also deals with refining the policies and the streaming administrative procedures of the coffee in the commodity exchange. And to increase farmers' coverage and accessibility, Ethiopia can strengthen and improve access to marketing centers and market service so that this particularly should benefit women coffee farmers. And the sixth pillar of this coffee strategy, Ethiopian coffee strategy, is a strengthening of entire coffee sector by building effective institutional linkage, collecting accurate sectoral data, and setting up coffee fund to invest in a range of activities could have a long-lasting impact on the entire coffee sector. And by relaxing the restriction on domestic market consumption, Ethiopia could correct distortion in price and enable accurate data collection, also benefit women and help to fulfill the gaps and make corrections. So ensuring inclusion of women in the youth and environmental sustainability will be important while improving production, export price, and the value chain activities. Within this, female coffee farmers will be benefited along that. So gender issues in the Ethiopian national adaptation plans. So Ethiopia has set a national adaptation plans generally how the farming community, including the coffee farming community, should adapt the increasing climate change impacts because Ethiopia is one of the vulnerable countries in East Africa which are impacted by climate change. So the gender issues in national adaptation plans addressed are existing and the potential gender differences in adaptation needs, opportunities, and the capacity should be built, and equitable participation and influence by women and men. Adaptation decision-making process should be strengthened so that women coffee farmers can be benefited and adapt existing and the continuing impact of climate change. So there is equity between women and men in access of financial resources and other benefits resulting from adaptation investment should be taken due consideration because particularly women coffee farmers may lack the financial capital to widen, to strengthen their coffee farmers and involve in the coffee marketing and the processing. So the financial resources and other benefits could make them adaptable to their investment to the climate change. So financial resources to providing as an incentive to encourage women farmers is very important, which is built in the adaptation plan of the country. So in my final recommendation, uh, generally what is in the policy, in each policies and the strategies the Ethiopian government has set equal benefit of women in the strategies, in the policies, but the main issue is just putting on the ground level, and what is put in the policy may be different, so that coffee loss insurance mechanism should be initiated for coffee farmers in general, and the women coffee farmers in particular. Due to the loss of climate change, there is a mechanism of coffee loss insurance mechanism should be developed for female coffee farmers and particularly. So what is mentioned in the policy document particularly coffee development strategy, should be implemented practically on the ground, focusing on gender inclusiveness, because Ethiopia has a good policies that are supporting women from the constitution, starting from the constitution, in each different strategies, but implementation on the ground lacks some gaps, so that these should be taken into consideration in the future. And thirdly, encourage, advocate, and promote gender mainstreaming in the coffee development strategy and the marketing, so that empowering women farmers access to land, credit, and information will be highly important to benefit female coffee farmers. And fourthly, what I recommend is encourage women coffee farmers to use new technologies, such as, for example, improved coffee varieties. We can adapt the occurring climate change impact and the projected impacts as well, so that women coffee farmers should be encouraged to use new technologies, which are lagging as compared to the male counterparts. So encouraging women to use new coffee technologies will help them to increase their production, the productivity, as well as help them to adapt the occurring climate change. And fifthly, strengthening credit facilities for women coffee farmers and provide incentives is very important. Developing credit facilities for women coffee farmers and providing incentives for them may help them to strengthen their investments, their farming, their involvement in the coffee marketing system, so that financial credit facilities and provision of incentives in the form of, in the kind of, for example, supplying new seeds, new varieties, supplying of fertilizers may encourage women to outstand from the impact of climate change and increase their investment in the coffee sector. So these are my last presentation, and thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Zenebe, for your very great presentation. I think we will, it would be good for us to have all the presenters presenting. After that, then I hope the plenary has taken down notes and questions and additions to that presentation. Thank you very much. Over to you, Vivian. Vivian from Colombia, to present to us about the Colombian experience. Vivian? Welcome, Vivian.
Hello, good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to see you again, Dr. Trofena.
Thank you.
We're very happy for this invitation. It's a very interesting platform to debate and exchange experiences. We hope that with this webinar, we can add and get more information in order to know how to pilot and collaborate between Ethiopia and Colombia. I'm going to share my presentation. Can you confirm that you can see my presentation on the screen? And please confirm if you can, first, if you can see the presentation, I will remove my camera so that I can put the presentation, and then you confirm me if you can see the slides.
Yes.
Thanks. In this webinar and with this presentation, I'd like to share about the national policy on climate change in Colombia. This is an introduction on the important topics that our national policy is addressing. And I'd like to identify how is it related to gender perspective and how we can have an agreement to implement it on the coffee sector. I like to say that this policy in Colombia was implemented in 2017. This policy, its main objective is to incorporate climate change management in public and private decision making. Our policy has an important objective to articulate the management of all of institutions from the government and the states regarding climate change. And it's important for our government to articulate these policies with all the enterprises so that they can have a document and to have a pathway towards resilience, adaptation, and climate change mitigation in the whole country. Basically, our national policy on climate change is focused on reducing risk from the climate change and also in integrating knowledge and experiences from different institutions in urban and rural context. It established strategies to mitigate greenhouses emissions through carbon production. It is a big opportunity also to leverage collaborative opportunities to mitigate climate change. Our national policy, it's divided in actions, long-term actions and mid-term actions. And the main long-term action is to mitigate the climate change. And one of the main purpose is to become carbon neutral. This is what our environment ministry wants to do since 2017. Our national policy has 5 strategies. It's focus on promoting rural development, that is a low carbon development and climate resilience. The strategies that we are foreseeing they are aimed to have a urban development that is low carbon and climate resilience. We need to have a low carbon and climate resilience development in mining, to establish also this type of development in the whole infrastructure, as well as on the management of the ecosystems and ecosystem preservation. That is, this policy through the strategic lines wants to focus on the rural areas, urban areas. It is focused on leveraging energy resources to be resilient, as well as infrastructure development, and it's aligned with ecosystem conservation. Within these strategic lines, the national government wants to establish 4 instrumental lines within the policy. Mainly, it believes that to have concrete actions to promote climate change mitigation, we need to plan the management. We need to generate information about climate change. We need to establish a definition on what it means to talk about climate change, and we need to include relevant topics to lead to science, technology, and innovation in order to achieve this target to be neutral carbon. Education is very important in every strategic line. In our national policy, we are reviewing the educational component. We want education to be within, inside the strategic lines, we need to have financial resources to allow the concrete actions and implementation of the strategic lines that I have mentioned. According or regarding the rural areas, we need to make a link between the rural areas and these national policies. It's important to mention that 84.7% of the municipalities of the rural areas in Colombia, almost all the municipalities are rural. It's a high percentage of rural municipalities. The country is divided and made of rural areas, whereas the 30.4% of the population lives in, only this percentage lives in rural areas. So working on the rural areas is very important. And this is where the national policy should implement and make efforts with private partnerships in order to reach the big objective to become low carbon and climate resilient. In Colombia, the countryside of Colombia, we find 55% of the national emissions of greenhouse emissions. So it's very important to focus on rural areas. Therefore, we have established some lines of action in order to achieve the target of being low carbon and climate resilient. What is the first line of action that we have decided? First of all, we need to promote agricultural, forestry, and fishing production system to be adapted to climate change. We need to disseminate information on climatic strategies. We need to share all this information. And here, efforts should be public and also private, and they should be oriented to create climate insurance. In Colombia, we already have an insurance called coffee insurance, and this insurance allows to insure coffee crops, especially if they are affected by climate change, like drought or floods, or maybe due to weather events, extreme weather events. So through this information dissemination strategy, we can generate tools to adapt to climate change, like the climate insurance. And as I say, we have one insurance for coffee. We have also different tools to forecast and establish early warning systems. We are focusing on the development of planting calendars in order to prevent crop losses. Another strategic action line, is to promote integral actions in the farms. Together with the information tools that I have mentioned before, we have also committed from the different actors, producers, coffee growers, they have committed towards the practices that they develop in their crops in order to be low carbon and climate resilience. We want to promote degraded areas restoration. This is very important for the issue that we have in Colombia. We want to enforce and enhance agroforestry systems. Like, for example, in the Cauca department, we have a policy coming from the National Federation that want to implement shade coffee ground. We don't want a coffee hectare that is no under shade. We are promoting shade growing coffee with different trees so that we can restore degraded areas. With this line of action in the farms, we promote family agriculture. This is very relevant, and it's very relevant to produce coffee focusing on food security. So how coffee plantations can have a adaptation policy, and how can we promote inclusiveness? How can we integrate women to produce food for the family? How can we can also see between the coffee plantations products like corn, bananas, vegetables to provide food for the family. Within these actions and the farms, we can establish activities to reduce deforestation. This is one of the most important areas as we consider the Green Deal, the European Green Deal that is calling for zero deforestation plantations. The work that we're doing with the coffee growers, it's in line with agroforestry systems, establishing diagnosis of the farms, how to preserve farms, how to renovate the infrastructures and the planning. This is one of the tools that we are implemented in order to have covered and in order to have shade grown coffee. Another line of action it's related to post-conflict. As you know, since 2016, Colombia was establishing peace agreements. And here, the government can play a big role to promote the occupation of some lands that were not cultivated, so that how can they restore all these lands? How can they tackle illegal mining, for example, illicit crops, and how they can convert these crops into licit ones? Another line of action is the technical assistance mechanisms. How can we start migrating to the use of technology, like the ones that we were talking on the line number 2, like insurance, climate insurance, early warning, etc. How can we start using this technology and give technical assistance with a focus on climate adaptation? Another line of action of this policy is to promote a climate resilient development and regulation on different sectors in the rural context. As I say, a big population from the rural area, especially women from these rural areas, they used to use cooking stoves with wood. So we are trying to convince them to use alternative energy or electric cook stoves for cooking. This is being promoted by the National Federation of Colombia. They have been providing different energy cook stoves, electric cook stoves, to mitigate the deforestation on the farm so that they can cook their food in a more efficient way. Another line of action is to promote sustainable forestry management. This is related with the other lines of actions that we have mentioned. And we want to integrate planning, improvement, and infrastructure rehabilitation of lands to assess the impacts of climate change, especially on the water availability. We need to assess these impacts to know how to tackle this with our lines of actions. Our national climate change policy, it's articulated in three parts. It's in three areas. We have a national focus with a intersectional climate change commission that is formed by different ministries like the agriculture ministry, rural ministry, finance ministry, etc. Many of the national ministries are included in this level, and they are oriented to establish climate change policies. This is how we try to implement on the how we try to implement the policies and to develop these lines of actions that we were commented before. The second level is the regional. It's also another important component of the national policy. We also have here some institutions on climate change that are formed by environmental authorities. We have representatives from different production areas, coffee production, farm, meat production, rice production, all the representatives from the different working institutions. We have here also national parks representatives and all the institutions related to forest and infrastructure and production. Here we also have research centers, and we develop and we held meetings, periodic meetings, to formulate plans with these authorities, and these authorities promote the implementation of these plans. The third level is the local level. Here, the local authorities are very important. The different mayors, governors that can generate and create plans in a local level to develop the area in order to implement these lines of actions that we have mentioned before, to implement also the national plans. When I was preparing this presentation, I wanted to share with all of you what we're doing on gender. And I did a revision of this gender policy and the climate policy. I wanted to see what was the relation. And I was surprised and a bit disappointed after this analysis, because a policy where the woman is really affected. We're talking about 84% of women, and here, sorry, 84% of rural areas, and here the woman plays a big part in agricultural practices, preservation. And I was surprised to identify that our Colombian policy, and this policy, the participation of gender, of these gender perspectives, it's only described by participation. So in these planning processes, we should incorporate mechanisms to make possible the most vulnerable participation, the most vulnerable population participation. Here it doesn't talk about if we're talking about women or indigenous. So there's not a chapter focusing on gender. This is a big concern for institutions like our institution in EthioLatinCoffee, where we need to stand up and say that gender should be a big chapter of this policy, so that these lines of action can really be implemented. It can really be translated into reality. It is very small, this women participation incorporation. We don't consider, or right now, a full chapter of gender is not considered. It's a very small part. So we need to establish this participation of women. So what do I want to do with this slides? Climate change is the topic of today, but if we consider this topic, we see that our policies really don't consider gender issues. Therefore, these policies are insufficient. The activities are insufficient. The women are not represented, and we need to take this into account in all the policies so that our intervention is more effective. We need to raise awareness. If we continue creating national policies in every topic, productive topic, or climate change or transformation, if we don't have a specific and concrete chapter for gender with concrete actions, women participation will still be minimum or even not existent. So here in the next slides, I want to show a feedback on what we have said before in the case of Colombia. It will be interesting to know also the Honduran perspective. Maybe they can tell us about it later. But in Colombia, in policy, there's a very weak acknowledgement of gender in climate change. We always talk about how important is women in every platform or space. But if we are not included, if we are not really included in these policies, our participation will be minimum. So if there are not links between gender and climate change, this is a barrier for the actions to include gender perspective. There are some public documents that recognize women and climate change. They talk about participation. They are recognized as a vulnerable population or part of the population. And they show that women feel more climate change impacts, but there's no awareness of gender issues in these policies. And this makes inequalities worse. and this makes this women gender concerns to continued. I think that thanks to the Paris Agreement, there is a bigger contribution from the different countries. We also have a nationally determined contribution for the period of 2020-2030. And I also revised this contribution, and it says that it's important to empower women and to achieve gender equality. They also mention it, but they don't mention how to do it. So basically, what we still observe in these policies is that gender participation or inclusion, it's just limited to register the number of women that participate in workshops and seminars, etc. However, just having a list of participation disaggregated by gender, this is not really an action to include gender. And this action doesn't allow us to mitigate the lack of inclusion of women and young people. So what are we needing? We need to include
Hello,
education
Vivian.
programs.
Hello, Vivian. Vivian, please move faster. You have 10 minutes. You have 10 more minutes only. Faster.
Okay. I was very excited about this part. So this is a call to all the colleagues, female colleagues and male colleagues, to add gender, where we need to be more determined to include gender in these policies. So very quickly, I want to say, what are we doing? So one thing is the climate change policy, and another thing is how the coffee sector, or what is the coffee sector is doing regarding the climate change. So we have signed an agreement that we call it Coffee, Forest, and Climate. It contains institutions from the public and private community. It's very important to develop actions for climate change. These are the main institutions that have signed this public and private partnership: coffee, forest, and climate. We have exporters, producers, EthioLatinCoffee, we have research centers. And what is our objective? We want to have an inclusive development that can contribute to the international agreements like the Paris Agreement to have a sustainable development. We want to promote mitigation and adaptation mechanisms in the coffee sector. And all the parts, we are committed to collaborate. This is very important for what we are doing. It's an agreement that we signed 2 years ago, where our secretary, the Latin Secretariat, signed it. So how all these actors can promote and integrate knowledge to foster coffee coffee producing in a sustainable way. We want to incentivize good practices to preserve forest. We establish different actions of adaptation, and every partner observe what are the good practices in order to copy them in our countries. Our objective is to protect and restore forest in Colombia. We disseminate information on how to do shades, coffee grown on shades, and this is how we work in an articulate way. What is Supra Cafe, EthioLatinCoffee, and AMOC doing? In order to have concrete actions for climate change mitigation, very quickly, I will tell you that we have a project that is financed by the European Union with 16 organizations, 5 continents, and it's a project for 36 months with 5 pilot countries in, sorry, 5 pilot hubs with 8 countries, so that we can transform the technology in order to identify sustainability and the productive chain. So we have NGOs, SMEs, research institutions, academic institutions, cooperative that are making efforts to support this objective. This is a challenge that is global. So the planet should have zero emission for 2050 to avoid the negative adverse climate repercussions. Our mission of our project is called Choice. We want to reach the 1.5 degree. We want to decrease the temperature through integrated evaluation models where we can integrate technology to change our lifestyle and decision-making process in the coffee value chain and in every value chain. So we're working with different pilots with 487 women coffee producers. We're doing awareness on climate change, technology use, where they're using Globion and Fable calculator. It's a tool that allow us to diagnose sustainability in the coffee value chain. And we're creating virtual groups to talk about climate change so that these women producers talk about what they're seeing in their crops, in their farms, how they can help each other. So women are empowered and know what to do to tackle climate change. Women are present in the whole coffee value chain, in the whole links, sorting the pulp in the whole value chain. And this is what we want to do with this choice project of 36 months. The main purpose is to collaborate, to have a permanent collaboration of women, not only to have the attendant list, just to have real collaboration so that we can have feedback of the strategies, we can assess the impacts. And finally, here are some recommendations. This is what we were talking about at the beginning of this webinar. So national policies and regional policies should take into account where are we at today. These policies don't take this into account. This is not only for today, it's like all the actions that we have been doing since 100 years ago. So these policies are historical. They don't take into account how indigenous and farming women farmers are protecting lands regarding climate change, and how we're doing and developing an important role on climate change. The climate change definition is really narrow, and women inclusion, it's superficial, unfortunately. As I was saying, we cannot think of a policy if we only take into account the attendant list of women. We need to have a bigger inclusion, a real inclusion of the women voices. And also we need to have a bigger participation in a education program to accompany them in order to implement these initiatives. Finally, you can see here this photo to tell you that the collective collaboration of women make us stronger. Thank you so much. This was my intervention. This is what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you very much, Viviana. I know you are very passionate about these gender issues and you wanted to say much more and take more time. Maybe if I should have given you a whole 2 hours to explain to us in detail, but allow us to also listen to the Colombian presenter, please. Please, over to you. Come on and let us listen to the Colombian presenter so that we can now move to the questions and answer. You have 20 minutes, 25 minutes actually. Thank
Hello, hello. Can you confirm that you can see my presentation? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can, we can.
Good morning. Thank you for this invitation. This is a very beautiful webinar. I am Juan Luis Hernandez from Honduras, from the Honduran Coffee Institute, ICAFE. And I would like to present the progress that we have made as a country regarding climate policies and the link to gender in the coffee sector. Let's remind you that coffee is very important for the country, and the national coffee sector is very relevant for the country's economy. We should then accompany these actions and include women. Generally, I would like to show some general information. So coffee is one of the biggest export commodity, the second after oil. It's a commodity from the tropical region of the world. It's 100 million of hectares of coffee in the world. And it is estimated that we have a 48% of coffee in the agroforestry system. There are 25 million of coffee farmers and 70 countries, tropical countries, growing coffee. In Honduras, our coffee sector, it's imperative for the national economy. 120,000 families are work on coffee production, and this generates a 30% of the agricultural GDP, as well as a 5% of the total GDP of the country nationally. There's been years, very, very good years on the coffee production, like 2016, where the production reached more than 10 millions of quintals. So the contribution of the national economy was 10% of the GDP. And nationally, out of these 120,000 families working on coffee, there's a 20% of women. So out of this 20%, we have an 8% of young women. So in the 18 departments of the country, 15 departments produce coffee, and this represents 210 municipalities. So 92% of the producer are smallhold producers with 0 to 15 hectares. So we have less than 1% of big producers. So our main producers are small holders, and 92%. We are the first coffee producer in Central America, and the third one in Latin America after Colombia and Brazil. And we are the 7th country worldwide producing coffee. Our coffee is widely exported. In Europe, 33% goes to North America. We also have a big percentage going to Asia and other countries. Regarding women participation, rural women participation in coffee in Honduras and in all the producing sectors, out of the total population of the country, we are 9 million of people. So out of this 9 million of people, 53% are women. So 4.6 million of women. We have 4.6 million of women in the country, and 53% is they work in coffee. Sorry, this 53% is the women share. 43.3 are in rural area. 8.8% work on agriculture, forestry, and fishing. So this information, in a way, it's biased by the registration. This is official data from the registration. There are other women that work on agriculture but are not registered. The FAO says that there is a bigger percentage of agriculture tasks done by women. But so 22% are women working, and it's estimates that the women contribution to agriculture will always grow. So 22% of women participation in employment in the country. It's very low, but this is the official data. So out of 100 people in the country, 22 will be employed. And 39% will be Honduran women as a head of the household. 22,578 women coffee producers in total. This is the data of the 2022 and 2023. So this is a 18.65% of the production compared to the 7 millions of quintals that were produced nationally in the 2022 and 2023. We can say that this data is limited to official registration. However, we know that there is a big percentage of women that don't register their activities, so that they are not represented in this percentage. They are invisible. Considering this, nationally, we have created some actions to give more visibility to women participation in the coffee sector. First of all, we say that we need to improve access to technical and financing means and resources. So in the country, there are many institutions working on technical assistance, support, and participation in rural areas. However, we still need to improve this area and we need to integrate women in these areas, because the rural women have less access to this technical support. According to our data, 25%, only 25% of women representation appears in the coffee farms. Sometimes this is due that women have different roles within the communities, and normally is the man the head of the household in these communities. Access to financial resources, it's very important. In the country, there are 3 ways to do this. First, through direct employment, where the person can get income to invest. This depends on the work that this person does. Another way is through insurance and mortgage or funds to receive credits. And the third way is with informal credits, where within the community, the buyers finance women and coffee producers to continue with their activities. So, as I say, there's only 22% of women employed. And access to land is one of the main issue to participate and access credit, and women don't have these capacities. We need to therefore enhance capacities and capabilities, skills of rural women coffee producers. Enhancing these capabilities can strengthen women, but the lack of women participation makes this harder. We have recommend to strengthen skills for women to participate in the coffee value chain. Then we need to establish differentiated intervention mechanisms. This is one of the aspects that we are underlying, because we cannot have the same rules on production for men and women, because for men it's easier according to the roles. It's easier for them to participate. So one of these mechanisms, we apply it to the registration. In the country, we have a registration, a register of producers, that we do it annually. This production that is registered annually shows that an 18% it's for women, but there is another percentage that is produced by women, but they don't report it. It's the men who register these activities. Regarding land ownership, during 2011 to 2020, Honduras granted more than 78,000 property deeds nationally, and we could identify 62% of titles for men, whereas women only had 37.3% of property deeds for women. This is important in order to access credits, because the private bank asks always for a collateral through incomes or through mortgages in order to cover these loans. Considering these barriers, the country has established some national policies, public national policies. Actually, 2023 was a very good year for the country because some policies were generated. We established the state policy for the agro-food sector in Honduras in 2023, was presented. This policy, we call it PESA, and it aims to improve economical, social, and environmental system to be sustainable, because this policy is from 2023 to 2043. We want this policy to be inclusive, to create activities that are inclusive, to leverage male as well as female capabilities in rural communities. This policy represents the reality and the aspirations of the Honduran producers. We're talking about coffee and other commodities. And this policy is related with public and private institutions and with the social, the civil society. So the coffee sector, also in 2023, 2024, issued the climate change policy for the coffee subsector of Honduras. So we already have a national policy on climate change, but this policy is focused on coffee particularly. Because this state policy was too general. So we developed this policy on a collaborative way with a 90% of participation of all the institutions. And this climate change policy for the coffee sector, it's a framework to establish activities to benefit coffee producing families, to make them more resilient and to be able to respond to climate change and extreme weather events. This policy was created because the country has experienced two extreme weather events. In 2015, it was the driest year in the history of the country. We had a big coffee production loss. In 2020 was the year we suffered the COVID-19, and the country experienced hurricanes, Hurricane Eta and Iota, that lead to extreme floods, and we lost the 25% percentage of coffee production. So due to these climate events or weather events, we elaborate this policy in order to mitigate greenhouse emissions and to adapt coffee producers to climate change shocks. In 2024, in this year, we're also suffering a big drought similar to 2015, where we have a lack of rainfall. So these two policies are applied to all the productive sectors in all the agro business sectors. And the second policy is focused on the coffee sector. So on previous years and 2022 and 2023, the coffee sector issued the gender policy for coffee. And this policy is divided on different parts and pillars. But the main pillar was to promote an integral inclusion and equal inclusion of women in the whole Honduran coffee value chain, to reduce inequality gaps that limits women and youth participation. This policy is been very important because since it's issued in 2022, we have observed in the rural communities and in urban areas has motivated the participation of different institutions, and there's a big and strong support for all the different projects on gender issues and in gender inclusion, as well as young inclusion in these sectors. We have experienced big challenges because, as I say before, there's only 22% of women employed, and this generates big challenges. But we are convinced that with the support of institutions and with the big impact that this policy is having on women, we can improve the participation, women participation in this sector.
Hello,
Then
you have 5 minutes, only 5 minutes.
Then we created a national policy on women from 2010 up to 2022. This was the first step, and now we are in the second one from 2023 to 2043. This is the third plan on gender and equality in Honduras. This is a technical and political tool to incorporate gender in the national plan and national vision of Honduras. Some of the political actions that we should implement to tackle climate change. First, to establish an agricultural policies with a decision making, including gender perspective, to have land access and to have extensive services that are inclusive and differentiated by gender. Second, we should enhance rural institutions and raise awareness on gender issues. So different rural institutions can engage and enhance gender. We need to reduce non-remunerated workload and to change to activities that are more productive and rewarding. We should forge new network organizations for women producers to meet their needs so that they can fulfill their objectives. So the country has different platforms where women can participate, also on coffee, and this has improved women's participation in the productive sector. In order to implement these initiatives of gender in the public policies, we need to gender mainstream them. This includes, among other things, preparing, designing, implementing, and monitoring. We have two key elements. We need a gender action plan to articulate all the policies with a gender differentiation plan in all the productive sectors. And we also need a communication strategy to make more visible gender issues worldwide. Some conclusions nationally. So due to our geographic characteristics, policy and economic characteristics, climate change is extremely relevant for Latin America and Honduras, as well as the Caribbean. We already know that climate change will be felt more on women than on men, because women cannot access credit or financial support. Gender mainstreaming and climate change should be done in gender action plans and climate change action plans. And lastly, we need to have a communication strategy to make more visible actions and the role of women on the films and the benefits that women provide to the country. Thank you so much. This was my presentation.
Thank you very much to Zenebe, Viviana, and Yuan for your beautiful presentations, very clear and to the point. You have made it possible for everybody who has participated or who has attended to this webinar to get to know what it means to integrate or mainstream gender into the climate change policies in our 3 countries. And from the presentations that you have made, in my view, you have been, you are fitting in. But I was saying that they have complemented each other. And talking about, they have spoken to the fact that gender has been mainstreamed at the different value chains in the coffee sector, so that it fills the inequality gaps. And they have come up with various strategies that can be used to ensure that it is not a mere rhetoric, or the policies do not just exist, but there is implementation of this. And not only the implementation, but then that the coffee farmers, the smallholder coffee farmers, the smallholder coffee farmers who are particularly women, are empowered by this policy. So I now invite you to, I invite the plenary to ask questions to our presenters. We have only 10 minutes. Anyone? With a question to a specific presenter on their country policies, or a general question, or a comparative analysis of the 3? I have one, and this goes to the Ethiopian colleague, Zenebe. In your presentation, you showed us that the women in Ethiopia form about 75% of the workforce in the production sector. And when it comes to the market or the income, they are represented by the inverse. They are represented by 25%. Now, considering that Ethiopia has come up with a very elaborate action plan to mainstream gender into coffee production, what specific strategy in that action plan is going to change this scenario so that the women also enjoy the income from the coffee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Trifa, for your questions. It is a nice question because women, as I mentioned, they contribute 75% of the labor force because they are involved in the lower value chain, for particularly collecting, harvesting the coffees, planting the coffees. In the lower value chain, income generation is less. That is why women are particularly involved in the lower value chain. When you come to the upper value chain, like exporting in the international market as well as domestic market, the involvement of women is less. That is why that particular shift of high involvement in the labor market, why the benefit is inclined to the main importers or exporters. So the strategy in the deal that there is a particular the government is focusing to support to organize female coffee farmers into cooperative. They are trained to be involved in coffee productions. There is special incentive have been developed in the policy strategy. As I try to mention in my presentation, but there are gaps in implementing the policy into the ground level. But there are incentives, there are initiatives to encourage female farmers by providing different training in the capacity building, in the business areas of coffee, how they produce quality for coffees, how they involve in the marketing system. There are trainings and initiatives, but to implement fully the policies in the ground, there are also still some gaps. But there are initiatives to encourage females by providing training to involve into cooperatives so that they will involve in the higher value chain so that they can increase the benefit from the coffee marketing value chain.
Thank you very much. I also heard from Joanne and Viviana about how they have put the action plan, the government policies and action plans into practice, where the Ethiopian government can also borrow a leaf. For example, I had clearly Joanne and Viviana talk about the diversification, the fact that it is not enough to just say mainstreaming of coffee or integration, but it is not just the idea of involving women in meetings, counting them, counting numbers and saying that we have gender mainstreaming, but it has to go further into action and their voices to be heard and for them to be granted the space to do what needs to be done. So as we are working on in this particular area, I think this webinar has been recorded and we will share it on our social media handles. And on the social media handles, when you listen to them, to the three presenters again, you will see that they are playing a complementary role to each other. And that is the importance of our webinars. They are meant for cross-learning, exchange of views and knowledge, and also for networking purposes. I want to thank you very much, all of you, for sparing time to attend this webinar. We expected more people to attend and to share their views and even to ask questions. I don't know today why we have not had a very large listenership, but I know as we share on our social media, it will go far and wide, and we will also get comments and questions. I urge Zenebe, Viviana, and Joanne, when you see the questions and a question particularly speaking to what you spoke about, please go ahead and respond to it so that the interaction continues. If there is no other question or issue, we can end here. Hello? Viviana?
Thank you, Dr. Trufena. I'd like to thank all of you for this, for giving us all this platform. I think that gender integration in policies, it's very complex, and it requires a more complex effort to pass from the text and the documents to action. There are a lot of work and professionals that are working on this, and we can contribute and collaborate to start creating this change so that we can finally get gender inclusion. I think we are all we all give a big contribution, and we need to give more visibility to what we are do, to how we think and how we manage these issues. Giving it visibility is very important. I agree with Juan Luis from Honduras, and that we need to communicate and create more platforms to debate within different institutions on the coffee sector, so that all together, jointly, can be more inclusive and participative from action. From my part, I am willing to keep collaborating. This was really exciting about this community of practice. I think it's a very good tool to create knowledge. Sometimes we think that gender is only women, but it goes beyond that. It's more complex. I think that we can work a lot on these definitions and on these criteria. Thank you for giving us this space and this platform.
Thank you very much for honoring our invitation and sharing your knowledge. Thank you very much. Any other person? Zenebe, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, thank you. I am happy to presenting this community of service. It is a very important forum to exchange knowledge. So that my colleague said, integrating gender issues into climate change issue is not straightforward. So it needs integration and collaboration among even African countries, even also other countries who have a better practice, a better best practice to be implemented. So I am very happy to be participate in this committee of service. Hopefully we will integrate and collaborate and bring best practices into this forum so that one can learn one from the others. And thank you. This is nice section, and goodbye.
Thank you very much. So I think as we end, we are agreeing that we have so much knowledge. We have the policies, we have the actors in this field. What we need to do now, as this community of practice, is to go ahead and develop that communication strategy for advocacy so that we include more people. We may not just be speaking to each other or to ourselves, but we spread out and speak to the world out there for behavior change. So thank you so much for that. I think this is a good way to end this webinar. Thank you. Hoping to see you in our next. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.